All right, so we're going to talk about the writing process today. This is something that I like to talk about at the start of the semester to get students to think about writing indeed as a process, right? So this isn't something where you sit down in a single fell swoop in one single writing session and you create a perfect paper. That is typically not how it works, right? You typically want to actually take these steps, these stages of writing in order to craft a paper, in this case in academic writing, right, that serves the needs of your audience. It's got a specific purpose. A lot of those things are driven by the assignment parameters, the assignment directions that you're going to get from assignment to assignment, right? So what we typically do when we first start talking about this is I'll ask the class, how many of you have written a paper the night before it was due? You started, you finished within that kind of 24-hour period before the paper was due. And the hands go up, including mine, because I've done that. And it's not great. It doesn't work well. So people experience, and I've experienced this too, a lot of stress, a lot of frustration. You find a lot of errors in the paper. You find that it's not as focused as it could have been, right? So it's generally not a good idea to approach things and do it that way. And the reason for that, as we determine, is that writing is supposed to be a three-stage process where you do some preparatory work before you start the first draft of your paper, and there should be some revision involved. So we're going to walk through this real quickly. So and my son has created some handy little cards to help you with that. So, and I've done a little bit of embellishment on those as well. So the first one is invention, right? So this is things that you do before you start the actual drafting process, right? So this can be brainstorming, this can be mind mapping, this can be clustering, this can be creating outlines, this can be thinking and ruminating about what you have to write. So again, some people like to get in and free write as soon as possible and get things down on the page to look at, and other people might want to just kind of sit and muse on things for a while, right? So, and this is to generate what's called writer-based prose, especially if you are doing that kind of free writing type of activity, right? And what writer-based prose just means is that you are the lone audience for that, right? So nobody else gets to see that unless you show them. Eventually, you're going to have to create a paper. You're going to have to start thinking about the audience, but here the audience is you. You're just trying to generate material and then harvest the best of that in order to get started on the next stage, which is drafting, right? So this is where you actually convert over to what is called reader-based prose, right? So this is where you start thinking about your audience, you start thinking about yourself as the author, you start thinking about the purpose, right? So again, these are key concepts in rhetoric. These are things that we're going to talk about throughout the semester, right? So, but this is where you actually shift from, okay, I'm trying to figure out what to write about. I've got some ideas, I've got some notes, I've got an outline, I'm ready to write this draft. I know it's got to be 1,000 words. I know it's got to have 5 paragraphs, an intro, 3 body paragraphs, a conclusion. I know the thesis has to do this sort of thing. So you can start piecing together what you need in the paper based on that, right? So as we're going to talk about, the intro may not be the first thing you write, probably shouldn't be the first thing you write. You might want to do some research to help with that. Getting a thesis is kind of this transitional thing between the invention part and the drafting part, because you're actually starting to write things towards your paper, and then things should build from there, right? And then that third step, once you've got a draft down, once you've got something on the page or on the computer screen, that moves you towards completing whatever assignment or whatever other thing you're writing to fulfill whatever other rhetorical situation you're dealing with. You then get into revising, right? So, and this is where you take that draft and you try to improve it as best you can, right? And it's not just retyping, it's not just looking for grammatical errors, it's not just looking for misspellings, it's looking about more structural things. Is this working? Is this functioning the way that I want it to? Is each paragraph cohesive? Is there a good flow? Some people will talk about, right, this idea of this kind of sentence to sentence movement where it's easy for the reader to transition from one idea to the next, where you have things organized. You have, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the 3 kinds of paragraphs, but how you set up quotes, how you provide context for quotes within your papers, and then obviously what you do with your conclusion as well, right? So there's a saying from a French writer, Valerie, which is a work of writing is never finished, it's just abandoned, meaning that you could go and revise and revise and revise and never quite be done, right? There's a point where you have to turn it in, where you have to publish it online, where you have to turn it into an editor to be in a newspaper, those sorts of things where you hit send in an email. Whatever it is, there's some point where you say, okay, this is expressing things as good as I can get it for the time being right now, and it is finished for the time being, right? So as we're going to find out too with some of the assignments during the semester, with some of the things that we'll turn in, obviously there's going to be points where we might want to reassess and revise beyond what we initially turned something in. But again, with thinking about the writing process and the steps, there's a starting point. Obviously, you have a blank page, you have a blank computer screen, and then there's an ending point as well. So hopefully this helps you as you think about how to not only write papers, but to think about your planning process, right? To think about the time that you want to give yourself. My recommendation when you're working on papers, if you can, is to take a day between your initial draft and your first attempt at revision and do absolutely nothing with the paper. Do other things, go outside, experience nature, things like that. You'll come back to it with a fresh perspective. Part of what happens that night before in that kind of experience is that you don't really have the fresh perspective to come back and see something new, and as it reads on the page, you're just trying to get ideas down, and that can create a lot of convoluted sentences and bad syntax and things like that. So when you come back to it fresh, you can see, oh, okay, I was trying for this idea in this sentence, but the sentence is kind of mangled, so let me actually correct the syntax here, and then we get to the crux of what I'm trying to say. You can have those perspectives a lot better if you come to it fresh versus if you're trying to draft and revise together. So that space will help. So again, try to plan for the time and the space and the energy to do that. All right. Good luck to y'all, and we'll talk more later.